الله أكبر الله أكبر.
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا. فصلى الله عليه وعلى آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. أما بعد، فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ولله ملك السماوات والأرض والله على كل شيء قدير. إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار لآيات لأولي الألباب الذين يذكرون الله قياما وقعودا وعلى جنوبهم ويتفكرون في خلق السماوات والأرض ربنا ما خلقت هذا باطلا سبحانك وقنا عذاب النار. صدق الله العظيم. اللهم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم ارنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وارنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم انس وحشتنا في قبورنا وارحمنا بالقران العظيم واجعله لنا اماما ونورا وهدى ورحمه. امين يا رب العالمين. So I've just recited the opening section of the last part of Surah Al-Imran. It's a wonderful sequence of ayats. There's a parallel also with how Al-Baqarah ends, and the structural parallels between Al-Baqarah and Al-Imran as a pair have been developed wonderfully by our teacher Dr. Israr, who was influenced by the school in the Tadabbur Quran school of Amin Hassan, Islahi and Farahi, and I'm sure the audience here is deeply familiar with that tradition. And so both in Al-Baqarah and Al-Imran, the beginnings are parallel. The inflection at roughly the midway point of the surah is parallel, and the end sequence is parallel. And there are a number of indicators that guide us to this conclusion. There are also thematic complementarity between the two. So one of them discusses topics that are right before the Battle of Badr in Al-Baqarah, and then in Al-Imran, post-Uhud, the things that transpire in the aftermath of Uhud. A wonderful series of ayats, and I just love the guidance that's provided in Surah Al-Imran on these themes. But I picked this last section for today because there's something really deeply special about it for me. I connect with it, and so I thought I'd share that connection with you. There's a distinctive feature of this is, if you notice, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. So men or people, those who remember God standing and sitting and lying down. يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ on the one hand. And on the other hand, وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And they think deeply, reflect on the creation of the heavens and the earth. And so, what I love about this is it brings these two things, dhikr and fikr, together. What we see in the world, in our own religiosity perhaps, is we incline to either dhikr or to fikr. It's either or. If you're in circles of dhikr, that's where you get absorbed. And you think that's the be-all and end-all of religious life, of a devotional life. Or you're in the circles of fikr, perhaps at a university or in secular learning. يَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Thinking about, and here it says explicitly, the creation of the heavens and the earth. This is what physicists do, and geologists do, and if you take it by extension, life, biologists do, anthropologists. And we'll talk about some of these disciplines in a moment. But those who are in the world of fikr today, maybe this was always the case to some extent, and we have our own inclinations, that's fine. But today, we see those who are in the world of fikr tend to disregard dhikr. And those who are immersed in the world of dhikr, they don't worry too much about fikr. This generalization. There are people who are balanced. MashaAllah. May Allah give them more balance. But the ayah here is not either or. It's both. What? Not aw. It's not who either do dhikr or either do fikr. They do both. And so you're a scientist, you also remember God. Always remembering God. So when you gaze out into the universe, you're remembering God. And if you are a devotee, a mystic, someone who is absorbed in the world of devotion and ibadah, ibadah I put in quotes because it's all ibadah. You're remembering God when you're doing fikr. It's not outside of the fold of ibadah. But those who tend to be in this world of dhikr, they poo-poo those who do fikr. It's like these people are thinking too much about these other things, but we need to be remembering God. But the ayah here is not either or. It's both. And that's a lost way of being that the Quran is reminding us of in this section. And so, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ لَآيَاتٍ. In the creation of the heavens and the earth. Like there's the ayat of the Quran that gives us material, it's a source for dhikr. But then there are also ayats in the universe. And that is the source or the object that then inspires fikr. Alright. And we know that the Quran refers to itself as dhikr. Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikr. We have sent down this reminder. The Quran is a reminder for us. There are things that we perhaps know intuitively and we forget. We get lost. We get distracted. And the Quran reminds us. This is a reminder that has been sent down to us. It's also thereby a guide. فَإِمَّا يَأْتِيَنَّكُم مِّنِّي هُدًى. And so, فَذَكِّرْ بِالْقُرْآنِ. Remind through this Quran those who fear the warning. And this Quran has been made easy. If you think it's difficult to approach, there's something wrong, not with the Quran, but with you. Right? Because it says, وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ لِلذِّكْرِ. We've made this easy as a reminder. And so, if you feel a barrier, there's something that you're not positioning yourself correctly. So reposition, reset. See if you can come back to this. It's not that hard. It's not supposed to be. We made it easy. But then when we turn to fiqh, we gaze out into the universe. And how do we know what we're looking at? This is science. Behind it is one of the branches of philosophy, epistemology. How do we know what we know? And you know, the ulama thought deeply about these questions. Actually, one of the first things they talked about when they, in the treatise of Kalam, philosophical theology, was epistemology. How do we know what we know? What are our sources of valid knowledge that we can work with? And so, this is very important for us to keep track of, because there are differences between how we understood these things in the past and how we are understanding them today. All right, so I'm coming to some things that we're going to find deeply challenging. So follow this. Some of us think that it's just all too easy. You have the Quran, it says these things, all you have to do is read it, and there's no discussion. That's what it says. And what I'd like to propose to you today, and then I think you'll find this intuitive and quite obvious, is this is a huge fallacy. And this is why we had schools of interpretation. Because people differ on what it says. And so when you're listening to somebody who says, Quran and Sunnah, that's all we need to do, you have to know that it's not that simple. Okay? Let me make my case. It's a bit like, think of it when other people do this. If someone says, well, the Bible says, you obviously, you think that's ridiculous. We do. Because you have all these different groups that read the same Bible or slightly different versions of it actually. But that's all the result of human interpretation. There's even people, an interesting parallel is when people say, politicians these days, they pull out, I'm going to read the Constitution. Well, if that's really? Are you really think that that's a good argument? Why do they dispute about which judge to appoint? Because they have different schools of interpretation of that Constitution. Right? So we're human beings. We're in a human condition. And we are now people of text and traditions. And we have interpretive traditions that we have inherited. And so, when you say, well, listen to the Quran and Sunnah, who's Quran and Sunnah? Maybe Yasir Qadi, I just take a few names you might, know. You got Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, you got Ghamidi Saab, you got Nouman Ali Khan, Amir Mustafa, whom I respect a lot. I'm not trying to undermine anything. I'm invite us to think deeper. That these, and this is not anything new. Even within the Sunni tradition, which is so cohesive, we have different schools of thought. And then we have schools beyond that. This is a result of human effort in history. And even beyond the legal schools, we have theological schools. You have Hanafis who are Maturidis. You have Hanafis who are Mu'tazila. And you have Hanafis who follow the Ash'ari tradition. It varies regionally. I'll give you a little story, mindful of time. I want to make a few points. You know, I remember this is my own experience. This is about 20 years ago, when we'd have the moon sightings. And there'd always be two different days. Some people would, I got a call from my home in wherever it is, Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, you know, they see the moon, we're going. And others would say, no, we're waiting for the local sighting, either local, hyper-local, or national even, right? And then there'd be difference of opinion. And it's really bothered people. Because, and I think it's fitrah, like we all want to be together, right? But, and I'm not going to resolve this issue, I'm not going to take sides here, I'm just discussing the phenomenon. And so, it never bothered me, just I'll be honest with you. But like we're all trying to follow the moon, we're all going to fast. We have slight different interpretation on when it begins. We can have reasonable arguments, but a little bit of ikhtilaf is part of the game. It's part of life. It's always been part of history. It was even part of the experience of the Sahaba on different issues. And so, and I can share a story from the Sahaba as well. And so, I remember when these debates were going on, the Fiqh Council of North America, that we're going to solve this once and for all. When you hear that, you know that this is not going to happen, right? But okay, what was their solution? Well, obviously, the astronomical calculation, birth of the moon. I remember this clear as day. The first year the Fiqh Council went with this, we had 3, not 2, because the birth of the moon came before anybody else, and they went with calculation, and then somebody from overseas and then the local moon sighters. And so instead of making us 1, we became 3. All right? And so what we have to realize is we're always going to live with difference. There's been differences within Islam, and there are differences outside of Islam. Human beings differ. What do we do with this? Some people, they look at religion and they'll say, well, there's no point. They can't even agree amongst themselves. That's a ridiculous critique. Because you never say that about other disciplines. Right? You have critique, you have differences between quantum theorists. They have different theories about what have a standard model, and then they have other possible solutions to the problems. Even doctors. I mean, you can get a second opinion down the street from one doctor. And so you don't give up medicine. What you do is, all right, we're human beings, we are fallible, and we have to make the best effort that we possibly can. Have faith, be humble, and move on. Right? Without being overly aggressive or confident about your own position. And this is, even Imam al-Shafi'i, we know the famous saying, is incredibly beautiful saying of the Imam that, look, when I'm debating with someone, it's for the sake of the truth. And I really wish that it's uttered by my opponent so that I can have the privilege of recognizing it and submitting, rather than the glory of outdoing them and losing myself in my vanity. So this is our tradition. It's vast, and in the classical epistemological tradition, epistemology is the philosophical branch of philosophy on the sources of knowledge. In Ilm al-Kalam, they used to say, all right, there's 3 valid sources of knowledge. There's ayats that are solid, muhakkama. When you get an ayat that's absolutely indisputable, this is a valid source of knowledge. Then there are our senses. When your senses are telling you something, it's valid knowledge. And then there is khabar. Khabar mutawatir. When you have overwhelming transmission of a report, everybody's saying it from the origin of the event continuously in every generation until today, either from the past or an event that's contemporaneous, but you didn't witness it, but there's enough people who credibly witness it. These are valid sources of knowledge that we can use in sciences, in ulum. There are other sources like a true dream, but that's for you. You can't come into me and say, I saw a true dream, now you all gotta get in line. This is not how community works after the final revelation. And so, this is how kind of knowledge worked, and Imam al-Ghazali in his Kitab al-Mustasfa min al-Usul, it's interesting, it's a book on Usul al-Fiqh, but he starts by discussing epistemology even in the Usul book. It's very interesting, isn't it? And he says there, it's a very brief kind of passage, he says there are two kinds of ulum, Dini and Aqli. Alright? And with the Dini, you have, tafsir, and ilm al-hadith, and so on, riwayah. And with Aqli, you have things like mathematics, right? Medicine, and these types of an-nujum, of the stars. This is all, and because you have to go out into the world. Now we can misunderstand this passage. He's not saying that the Islamic sciences are not rational, or there's no God over there. He's talking about method. He's talking about method. وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Everyone has access to samawat wal ard. Only believers have access to the Quran. I mean, others can access it, but the believers are approaching it with a certain preconceived, a belief that guides them. But everyone else is able to observe the universes on neutral ground, so to speak. And so the Aqli kind of derived from this neutral space. And this is why Kalam became so important. Because they were actually trying to deal with the problem of pluralism. And if you look at Imam Maturidi's Kitab al-Tawheed, the beginning begins like this. What do we do with all these religions? How do we know which one is true? Well, you want to quote the Quran, or they're going to quote their own text. So that doesn't help. You're going to say, we have more followers and they have fewer. That's no argument. It's a non sequitur. Doesn't follow. And so he said, ultimately you have to go to an independent source. And this is what Kalam was trying to do. And so, and he says, and actually Imam al-Ghazali says in Kitab al-Mustasfa, Ilm al-Kalam is ashraf al-ulum min al-ulum ad-diniyya. Is the best because it combines Dini and Aqli, but he still classifies it as a Dini. So, when they went to Aqli, they thought about wujud. When they went to Aqli, they thought about existence in the world. Maybe, a technical term for that is ontology. So you go from epistemology to ontology, and they're intertwined. And we'll see we ultimately get to cosmology, which is the structure of the universe. And so they worked in rational categories. They went into the mind. And they said, all right, when you think about things that exist, there are only three possible kinds. Even before you are empirically investigating something, just rationally. There's things that are mumkin al-wujud. They may exist. They may not exist. There was a time when this table, this podium is here. It could be slightly different. There are other podiums that could have been made, but they weren't made, right? It's mumkin al-wujud. There are things that are mustahil, impossible, categorically impossible. It's impossible for this podium, this very podium, to be here and there at the same time. Right? It's impossible for anything like that to exist. Right? So they're working out categories with the mind. And then there are things that are necessary. They cannot but exist. Actually, there's only one such thing. Right? And this is how they rationally got to the uncaused cause, the unmoved mover. the prime mover, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who's wajib al-wujud. This is a category that the philosophical theologians, even the mystics, they would use. His existence is necessary. All other existence are merely mumkin, or mustahil, or impossible. I want to bring your attention to today. This is no longer how we think. At least this is not how the academy is thinking, how scientists are thinking. They're in completely new ways about thinking about things that exist. And I'm not an expert. I've read some general books on this. Maybe you have as well. And whereas in the past, we believed that knowledge that we could work out in our minds like this, with valid reasoning, was certain. Now, the empirical scientists, everything they're working out is in the realm of probability. And it's fallible. So the statements we make about the world, the theories that we articulate, they are at best probable. They may work in certain conditions, and so they are the best explanations that we have of phenomena at this time. But they are always fallible, potentially fallible. Like in the future, we may say something completely different. And you think of previous paradigms of knowledge, they could not possibly have conceived of the universe as we conceive of it today. It was inconceivable to them. And so when they stood on the earth, it was inconceivable to them that it's moving. I mean, if you were on a moving earth around the sun, you know what happens when you're on something that moves, first of all. No experience of that. In fact, you see the object in the sky moving. Then, you know, when Galileo started looking through his telescopes, and he's like, wait a minute, the heavens aren't exactly like we thought they were. There's spots on the sun, there's moons around Jupiter, Venus has these various different phases, just like the moon, and those phases are only possible if it's revolving around the sun. And so there's something else going on up there. And people didn't believe him. But they had really good reasons not to believe him, to not believe him. Because if we're moving around the earth, there's another thing we should observe. It's called parallax. Like you see this pillar where there's these four fans in front of me. There's people behind the pillar. And the pillar stays stationary. But when I move, I see a movement of the people behind me. And so, if we were moving around the sun, we should observe parallax. We should stellar parallax. The stars in the background should shift behind the object that's in the center, which is the sun. No shift observed. There's only two reasons. Two reasons why we would observe no shift. One is we're not moving. It's that simple, and that's the conclusion that they came to. The other is the objects in the background are so unimaginably far away that the shift is imperceptible. But they didn't imagine a universe that was as enormous as the one that we realize that we're in now. So they were all using reason, right? But the paradigm shifted. Now we're in a completely different universe. And we have completely different theories of knowledge. And when we think about the creation of the heavens and the earth, how do we do this? Well, if you start with the heavens, it's all light. They're now starting to mine, the moon or got some rocks from the moon and bringing some stuff back from Mars very recently. But we couldn't touch this before. It was all based on what we could observe. We got better and better telescopes. We capture light and we analyze that light. Spectrums, shifts in wavelength to see if they're moving closer or further away, red and blue shifts. And so this is new knowledge. Now, if we're Muslims and we read this ayah, وَيَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, we should be at the forefront of stargazing as a religious obligation. But we kind of, those people coming up with all these theories. I mean, move forward. They're splitting subatomic particles now in these colliders. We're not doing it. We're not thinking about it. Let them do it. And they're imagining and dreaming up. They're making the world of the future. They're dreaming about what's going to come 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 100 years from now. They're also destroying the world in the process. We're just kind of bystanders. All right, we're looking at the time, just fast forward a little bit. The Earth. So right now, the latest theories are that the universe we're in is about 13.8 billion years old. How the heck do we know this? It's just mind-boggling. They can even kind of break down the first second into, 1 minus 0.000 this happened and this happened based on the experiments they're doing. But then the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. How do we know? They compare all kinds of data, how the solar system formed, how other solar systems are forming. They look at the Earth and they dig into the layers. They can carbon date the rocks, and they found like the oldest kind of rock is about 3.5 billion, but their theories, based on all other kinds of triangulations, are about 4.5 billion years old. Life came shortly thereafter, but it took a long time for it to become complex. And there's an explosion of complexity about 500 million years ago. How do they know this? Biology, genetics, and fossils of paleontology, the science of studying the bones. And then they study how culture began to form in the earliest communities. Archaeology, anthropology. These are all the ulum today. This is يَتَفَكَّرُونَ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And then the next part is about the human being. رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا سُبْحَانَكَ فَقِنَا عَذَابَ النَّارِ. We. The next part of the ayah is about us. We have come to a realization. Some people will articulate this, those who do just fikr alone. Now remember, we're combining dhikr and fikr here. They'll say, we are the universe that has come to think of itself, has become conscious. That's an interpretation. We offer a different interpretation. But we have a huge challenge before us. And this is really the point. Some of you who walked in late, you might be like, what is this guy talking about? There's a highly systematic and derivation from the ayat, just to fill everyone in quickly, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of Surah Al Imran speaks about dhikr and fikr together. And conventionally, those who do dhikr and those who do fikr, these gatherings have become separated. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, keep them together. And only then you will have moral awakening. رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا Subhanak, and you will be able to be agents in the world as the rest of this sequence of ayat unfolds for us. I had a couple of other examples, but I'm not going to have a chance to develop these. I haven't decided. I'm here for this conference on faith in action, so you're all invited to this. They've said make sure you register if you're coming. Perhaps we can talk about some of these topics, and there'll be many other speakers there as well. Let me just move towards a conclusion by saying things are changing fast. Like all of human history has unfolded with the climate, with geology as a kind of stable backdrop. But now human beings have become geological agents. We are changing the background with us. And the pace at which all of these changes are accelerating are so frightening. We have absolutely no idea what's coming. One of the books, Mustafa Sulaiman, Microsoft, you heard The Coming Wave. We heard it a couple of years ago, but it still, would scare you like nothing else in terms of just in 3-4 years what we can expect. I know that some people say, well, they've been saying this for a long time. I saw a quote from Paul Krugman, one of the economists, who said, well, it was in the early 2000s, that the internet will one day be just as influential as the fax machine was. He had no idea what was coming. And what we're seeing now with artificial intelligence and biotechnologies, genetic engineering is, the next level, and the pace is that much quicker. And so even in the next 5 years, we'll be in a completely transformed world. And we're not making it. We're consuming it mindlessly. But that's not the role of the khulafa. And so the invitation here is really for a regeneration of our roles as khulafa, which was really all about ilm. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. And the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, if you want to do the dhikr and fikr, فَضْلُ الْعَالِمِ عَلَى الْعَابِدِ. If you want to take the one over the other, then the superiority of the alim, the fadl, the grace, over the mere worshipper, al-abid, said, كَفَضْلِي عَلَىٰ أَدْنَاكُمْ. It's like my privilege is over the least of you, my companions. So the Prophet ﷺ has laid clear where our priorities should be. And we ignore this at our own peril, especially at a time such as this. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us and to kindle in our hearts a love of knowledge and to pursue it with integrity and with sincerity. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين والمسلمات إنه هو الغفور الرحيم فاستغفر الله. الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى. أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. We also ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to keep always in our mind and in our hearts people who are suffering all around the world. Foremost amongst them the Palestinians who have suffered on our screens. It's I just have a hard time thinking about how we can go on witnessing this. It's really an age of great tribulation. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ease their suffering and to bring them relief. And also the people of Sudan who are invisible, but their suffering has been tremendous and at a scale that far surpasses those of the Palestinians in terms of scale. I'm not talking about intensity, but it's no less intense. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help them and to bring them relief and the oppressed people of the world everywhere. And I want to also pray for our leaders. We live in a country that is the most powerful country in the world at this point in time, and we hold tremendous amount of influence over these conflicts. And the leaders, as flawed and blemished as they are and we are, but they are in positions of authority, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide them. He controls all the hearts, never despair of God's mercy. عباد الله اتقوا الله يرحمكم الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله يذكركم ودعوه يستجب لكم ولذكر الله تعالى أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون وأقم الصلاة